good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Way Forward Workshop, Leader Lunch Break. We are pleased to welcome Ayonna Blue Donald. She is a change agent. She's passionate. She's a passionate advocate for neighborhoods, a lifelong public servant, and a boomerang. Blue arrived in Cleveland as an undergraduate at Case Western Reserve University to earn a degree in mechanical engineering. She left us to pursue a law degree and to begin her career as a civil litigator, but could never quite leave Cleveland behind. She returned about 10 years later with a commitment to improve the health and wealth of neighbors and neighborhoods. She found her role in the Department of Housing and served at City Hall for 10 years, the last 4 of which she was Director of Housing. In her time there, she participated in the groundbreaking work of the Lead Safe Coalition and worked with determination to make equitable changes in housing. She addressed this by trying to eliminate years of redlining, disinvestment, and neglect by equitably distributing demolition funding to create space for future economic and community development activities. Her efforts eliminated literally thousands of blighted properties throughout the city of Cleveland. Most recently, she served as the Chief of Government Affairs for the Department of Port Control, the airports of Hopkins and Burke, and she has found a home with her role as President of the Ohio market for Enterprise Community Partners. There, she is charged with advancing creative policy-based solutions to allow all Ohioans to achieve housing stability and economic mobility. And of course, she still continues her work with the Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition. Mayor Jackson described her as a smart, effective, and accomplished public servant and one of the finest directors of housing to ever work at City Hall. She was recognized by Crain's in 2021 as a woman of note. She's a proud member of Leadership Cleveland 2021 with a few cheering fans here with us today. And she's an outspoken proponent for appropriate and equitable property tax abatement. Welcome, Blue.
Wow, thank you, Marianne. I think I need that write-up. No, thank you so much. First, I'd just like to say thank you, everyone, for taking a brief time out of your day just to listen to me kind of get some thoughts on tax abatement and where we were and where we landed, which I think is in a really promising spot for our city. And thank you for Cleveland Leadership Center for just inviting me to speak today. And I do also want to give a shout out, of course, to the best class ever. I have to say it, and I see a couple of 2021 Leadership Cleveland classmates. So thank you so much, classmates, for coming out to support. I really appreciate seeing a couple friendly faces in the crowd. So by no means, I just want to start this conversation just by saying, by no means do I represent that I'm an expert in this work, but I think I do really have a perspective. And I just want to share a couple things just from my thoughts about the maybe factors, events, trends that really led us, right, and set the stage for there to be such political and community will to even entertain the thought about tax abatement overhaul. And what does that mean in our community? So I'll speak briefly to the history and where we kind of landed with tax abatement, but for surely this is a conversation. I welcome any questions and hopefully I'll be able to answer some. I see my de facto used to be assistant director, not really Councilman Breccatelli on the line. So I'm sure that he can also provide a lens to some things that maybe I miss out on. But, really, there was a change brewing for years, as I mentioned, in the community. The administration, council, community advocates, you name it, policymakers, developers really have sat at different tables for years, really saying, hey, what does this look like? Do we need to change tax abatement? Do we not? Do we keep things the same? How do we make things equitable? In 2020, the city published the City of Cleveland Tax Abatement Study, and in 2021, the city published what's called Cleveland 2030, a housing equity plan. And in both of those studies, tax abatement really was strongly contemplated and recommended to help just really push development in our city. When you drive around, as all of you, I'm sure, on this call do, and you explore our communities in the city, it's clear and really not so much debatable that some areas have a lot of investment in our city, while others really have little to none. And right, how is that fair? I tell my daughter, fair, that's really not a word we should use because life isn't fair, but really, how is that fair? How is that equitable? It really isn't. So what really has been up for debate is how do we fix that? How do we fix that problem where some neighborhoods are more invested in, other neighborhoods are less invested in? And I won't propose that tax abatement is the end all be all solution because it's not, right? There have to be several other tools in place to really kind of fix this bigger problem that has been brewing for years and years and years. But at some point, we really had to consider, well, what parts of the system should we change? What systematic approaches do we need to change? And the time was right. In 2022, the legislation was ripe. It came due. It was either pass what was or put forth the same legislation that had been in place for years, or to think about a new model. So with that in mind, we really came to the conclusion. When I say we, I mean the Equitable Community Working Group, which was kind of a group of 20 different stakeholders. An enterprise and CNP, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, convened this group since 2018 with that shared goal of making more equitable development policies to really put in place. So previously, no matter where the development was in our city, everybody had a 15-year, 100% tax abatement was given to the project. That model, there was a time and place, well, that definitely was appropriate, but it became clear that we needed to drive just development in different areas. How do we do that? So the city, the administration really picked 3 different areas, 3 different market types to say, let me try to focus. And I want to share just briefly so everyone can see. Sorry about that. And I'm assuming everybody at this point can see that slide. And so here's a map. So you'll see a map that shows what really were the 3 delineations of where the tax abatement landed. Information data showed that there were 3 distinct market rate. So that is normally maybe your Detroit Shoreway, Tremont, Ohio City kind of neighborhoods. Middle market that are right on the fringes. They're right on the cusp of perhaps attracting lots of a development, or right on the cusp of falling, really right on that line of falling into opportunity, where there really needs to be a lot of attention focused. So when I talk a little bit later about the 3 neighborhoods and the delineation of their market classifications, this is what it looks like and how it kind of spreads throughout our city. Now, with that in mind, we said, look, we have 3 distinct market typologies. We should have kind of 3 distinct, perhaps, ways of looking at tax abatement. We use data, we use best practices to look across our peer cities to say, hey, look, this is what they're doing. They're using these data-driven maps that I showed. You're geographically targeting tax abatement. Will it work? The jury's still out. But we aim to hope that targeting different tax abatement strategies in each one of those neighborhoods will incentivize developers, on top of other things that I hope the city will have in works and that we're advocating for, to invest in these neighborhoods. Because prior to this tax abatement change, essentially people, and I know why, if I was a developer, I would too, you would flock to the neighborhoods that would give you the, your greatest rate of return, and not really incentivizing going to those weaker neighborhoods. So really, where did we kind of land? We landed in such a place that I hope that the community and developers really can coalesce around, and really let's see what works in the next couple of years. If it doesn't work, this is the beauty of what has been proposed, because it's data driven. Sometimes we get policies before us and it's maybe a little touchy-feely, oh, I think, I feel, etc. But this was really based on what does that data mean. So where we landed, it's an 18-month phase in. So we really felt that it needed to be enough time to really give everybody just time to figure out, what does this policy mean? How does it apply to us, developers? How does this really work out in our finances for different groups, but also give developers time to get in those projects, right? They have 18 months to really get in some projects and say, I want to be on the old model. Maybe you don't like the new model, that's fine. Let's see if you can get in before all the rules change. What does it mean in those 3 neighborhoods? In those opportunity markets that are, not maybe haven't seen much development at all and pick an amount of decades, it's 100% tax abatement, no matter what. But we did feel that there was important to cap the amount, so there's a cap. So up to $450,000, there's a cap. Middle markets, also, let me go back. We want to also encourage affordable housing in everything that we do. There is if I say a dirge, it really is. In Cleveland, about 9,300 homeowner households and about 26,000 renter households are severely cost burdened. What does that mean? That they pay over half of their income in housing each month. Affordable housing is one of the greatest issues. It's one of Enterprise's, it's really our hallmark and our goal that we push for is an issue that we have in our community. I'm not an economist. I'm not saying we're in a recession or not, or inflation, et cetera, but rent prices are going up at an alarming rate. And so how do we kind of address this when we address new development and rehab, right? So one way to address this is to encourage affordable housing, in all of our new developments. So how really does this happen? So if you have affordable housing, if your units are restricted to affordable housing, doesn't matter where you are in the city, we want you there. We want you building. So that means 100% tax abatement for 15 years. Sounds good? Sounds good, because I would hope that all of our community really understand the need to have that. So then when you look at if perhaps you don't have 100% affordable housing and you have a little bit restricted in your area, then that's when we kind of drill down to different levels. So in the market rate areas, it's 85% tax abatement. Doesn't sound so bad, maybe. To some people, it does, because we went from 100% to 85%, but we felt that at this moment that was equitable in order to just kind of gradually get people in. Will that make such of a big difference for developers? We're hearing that it will, but we're not sure to really drive them to the opportunity market. In the middle market neighborhoods, those neighborhoods that are kind of on the fringes, right? There is 100% tax abatement in those as well for new construction and for rehab as well. We don't want to just say new, and I think that Marianne did a good job of kind of explaining all the demolitions that I caused in building and housing, which is great. But there is also absolutely a need to protect the housing that we have. So this is not only producing new housing, this is also protecting the housing that we have to make sure that rehabilitation and remodels actually have tax abatement as well that's protected. I can't tear down anything anymore, but just as a city and as a community, we can't raise every single property. There has to be some type of mix, and we hope that this also encourages that as well. I also want to call out that it's very important that there is a community benefits agreement that will be in place for multifamily market rate development that secures affordable housing investments. So this will be either through a unit set aside or a fee placed into the City Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So we feel that it's also very important. Now, that's also everything that I mentioned has been debatable, has been debated, and I welcome questions about that, because I can tell you, quite frankly, it was definitely a big lift just to get us to this point where we did pass some changes in tax abatement. Is it perfect? No. But do we feel that it's a compromise? Absolutely. And when you are in a place where we've done things for so long, we have to at least try. We are on the cusp of so many great things in our city with housing and with development. We have an unprecedented a number of ARPA funds here that we can leverage, perhaps with other incentives with the tax abatement. So that was something else that we kept in mind as we were looking to propose changes and recommendations to the tax abatement rules. Let me see if there's anything else that I want to kind of call out before I answer questions. I also want to call out that we did continue to require green building standards in this day and age that we have so many things that are focused on climate change. It's important that we incentivize any developers that are adhering to the green building standards. As some of you may also be aware, there's always this issue when new units, developments, et cetera, kind of come up in neighborhoods, and then as I know from my old role, issues with compliance. So there is a clawback provision for non-compliance. So there is an enforcement model where someone just can't plop a property down in our community. You get the benefit of tax abatement, and then essentially you don't follow the rules. And I think those are really the important parts that I really want to call out. That this was really an effort, or really is an effort, to focus on how to make and incentivize development in our communities that hits on an equitable level, not a equality level for everyone, and to drive development. So we aim to not drive development away from market rates, but incentivize development and opportunity in middle market neighborhoods.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and we will jump into our questions. So let's talk about the process for building support for this change. What do you know to have worked well, and where did the process run into some barriers?
I think that it's always hard when you have so many people in anything. Enterprise, just as an entity, as I've been here for about 7 months, we lead a lot of different coalitions. So I can say this across the board. So it's not really unique to tax abatement or lead, or, we do housing first and some other things. When you have a lot of people at the table, it's hard to coalesce and agree around things. But then when you have the mix of the administration, which may have one direction that they want to move in, you have the mix of city council, and maybe varying factors even amongst the 17 people there. You have developer communities, you have the CDC. So there are so many people that are at the table that essentially, have a viewpoint, and they aren't always agreeing or in agreement. So trying to meet in that middle spot, right, I think was key to get this passed. And that's with, as I mentioned, any kind of coalition, or when you have a lot of people at the table, is how do you get to that sweet spot without either offending someone or having someone feel like their voice isn't heard, or dismissing their viewpoint. Because I really live by that philosophy, in the sense that it doesn't matter if I don't agree with you. I want to understand your viewpoint and your side of things, because it matters and it's important. But working through that process, I think having a transparent process, at least with the Equitable Community Working Group, as much as possible, sending out information, having an engaged group of people, having consensus. So any recommendation we put forth was not just one person sitting in a room saying, this is what should happen. There was actually a consensus basis to say, hey, we all or majority agree on this, and let's move forward with that. And I think that the administration and council appreciated that process, and appreciated that viewpoint, that we were all kind of coalescing around certain things to move forward.
How much revenue is expected from the changes that will generate for the city?
I'm not sure how much revenue will be changed, because I could say probably minimal amount of revenue will be generated. If you think about the set asides, that's something different, and I don't consider that revenue, right? And that's only time will tell, because those set asides on projects that are saying that they don't want to adhere to the 100% tax abatement, and they have to pay a per unit in lieu of fee, that's not revenue. It will go back to, hopefully, communities where, say, a project is happening in Fairfax, and it's just completely market rate, and they don't want to do any affordable housing, and they pay the in lieu of fee. The hope is that amount of money that's set aside will be reinvested back into that community.
What will be the measures of success to evaluate the impact of this policy change? How will you know how to move forward?
That's a very good question. And I think it would depend on who you ask that question to. So from my viewpoint, quite frankly, it's just to see two different things. In the middle markets, it's either to stabilize those middle markets, or to get, some of those pockets, if I showed you the chart, to actually be market rate, right? I think the goal is that every neighborhood, I mean, is it realistic? No, but to move towards a more market rate situation. We want investment to happen. We want there to be enough affordable housing units throughout our community where people can afford to live in our city, right? So I think those two would be my most top factors, but I think maybe from a developer viewpoint, this will probably be successful once there are other things in place around just the tax abatement to incentivize, to offset maybe what they feel is a reduction in tax abatement availability or incentives in some places. So to have a complete package, right, of just development tools to encourage growth and development in all areas in our city.
And as you look ahead to the next 18 plus months as you're evaluating, what are some of the challenges that you anticipate, and how might the city, those involved, work through those challenges?
Definitely in the 18 plus months, because now in the 18 months, there aren't any changes. So I think in the 18 months, there has to be a concentrated like engagement effort to really hear what people need. So either what our community is expecting or what our development community really needs to make these developments and not have them. I think one fear that I've heard over and over from either our CDCs and from developers is that they're going to leave Cleveland. So that's not what we aim to happen, right? We don't want anyone to exit our market. We want our developers here. I mean, we want other developers to come as well. So I think in the next 18 months, that's what really needs to happen, is making sure that people understand really what this means and how we can build process around it. Now, when we move out to really that implementation phase where this kind of works, is making sure that the city has all the systems in place, right? To be able to handle this change, because it's different. And being on the side of, I worked in administration, it's always kind of difficult to get systems in place. It's making sure that both the administration and council have whatever that means, their review process in place. Like if this is not working, then what changes need to happen? If this is working gloriously, how do we continue this in a way that it will continue to work gloriously and that it will grow? So I think those are some challenges and things that people really have to pay attention to.
And who was involved in the working group?
Oh gosh, let's get a list. Who wasn't involved almost? So in that Equitable Community Development Working Group, as I mentioned, so CNP, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, through Tanya Maness and Ed Stockhausen, and us here at Enterprise and Emily Lungart kind of led the effort. So you would have people from, if I'm kind of going through the list quickly, there were CDCs involved. There were a couple of foundations involved. There were some nonprofit development providers involved. There were, I think there was someone from, well, Lisk was on there as well, so that's kind of like my competitor, but I love them and we all work together. There were people from just a cross section of our city. I believe Case may have been involved in some of the, what do you want to call it, like data analysis. Yep, they were. I'm just looking through my group. That's about it. I mean, I can name names, but that's about kind of like the cross sections of people that were involved.
And from that working group, how was it that input from developers, builders, homeowners who were going to be impacted by the changes sought and included in the change?
And so if you think about like how this group, as I mentioned, I think this group was really pulled together in 2018-ish, right? So right after 2017. So there have been ongoing conversations with people that along the way. So there came a point in 2022 when we were coalescing kind of like this group of 20 or so people. But throughout the years, there have been conversations with developers, but also keeping in mind of what the Equitable Community Development Working Group's task was, but also the administration and council also had, well, what I feel a task or responsibility to also reach out to developers and such. So as I understand it, administration and council had those conversations with developers and community members and homeowners and such, as we did through our partners. So for instance, if I say that Burton Bell Carr or from Mecos was at that table of community, the Equitable Community Development Working Group, the expectation is those people would also reach out to their community, right? To see how this fits in their model for their community. If I say that downtown Cleveland was involved in this, et cetera, et cetera. So there was also a responsibility, more or less, for each kind of group that sat at this table to make sure their constituents and whoever they were representing, their voices were represented.
And coming from studies and looking at this issue, there's been a suggestion to help protect long-term owners from tax increases by implementing the LOOP program. Has Enterprise made progress with the state in getting this legislation passed?
That's a great question. So as much as Enterprise, we lead tons of things, this is actually being led by Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, as I understand it, with Ed Stockhausen. So I definitely don't want to step on his toes or their toes to reveal any information, but I feel that this is crucial in protecting and preserving just our home ownership that we have right now in our city. Because one of the concerns for surely is when we think about $1 million property coming in next to a property that may be valued at $200,000 or $150,000, you don't want to displace that person that's in the $150,000 property because the valuation of the properties or assessment appraisal of the properties in that area go up. That makes that person's property tax go up. You know, I took a trip to Michigan or Detroit even before I was in this role. In my previous role, there are definitely cities and different states that have things in place, and I just implore Ohio to do such. So if there's anyone on this call that's interested in that, I would for surely reach out to CNP and Ed Stockhausen as they're kind of leading the work on that advocacy.
So as you look at your work in the landscape of Cleveland, what's the next big issue that we need to address? What's that next change that you would like to see us tackle?
I think that the next change is, I hope I don't get in trouble in saying this, but you know, it's been in the news. I think it's, you know, some discussion that will happen at council today, and how much is this really a big change, but it's how we spend the ARPA dollars and how those are allocated. I think that will make a huge change in our community. This is a once in a lifetime funding that will happen. There is definitely a need to preserve housing units, affordable housing units that may roll off of that like 15-year LIHTC deal. There's a need to bolster our CDCs and the community development work that they do such great work, right? There is a need to create more incentives for home ownership. There are so many things, and I hate to just rattle off a couple of things, but in that grand scheme of things, I think a lot of those things could be tied back to ARPA and our ARPA dollars and how we decide to allocate that throughout our community.
We have time for one more question. So with the work that you're doing through in the working group and the partnerships, what have you been most encouraged by through this process?
I think that I'm just most encouraged by the notion that people are willing to have these tough conversations. So even when we don't agree, Cleveland is just such a great and unique community, which is why I have boomeranged back, right? And I've been here for 10 years. I think we really have a knack for digging into tough problems and thinking up creative solutions. And so that's what I've been most encouraged about, because there are some big, heavy problems that are before us, but we have the will and I think really the desire and drive to tackle those, and we can.
Well, Ayonna, we thank you so much for sharing your insights today on such an important issue, and we look forward to seeing what is going to happen over the next few years as this policy takes shape. And I'm going to turn it back to Mary Ann.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, we're very grateful that you brought your talents back to Cleveland to make it your permanent home. We'll keep it that way. Thank you for your great work.